treason. This is so tragic. It's like we have gone from farce to tragedy. I was absolutely astonished yesterday when the television media, CNN, MSNBC, they were avoiding the word that Trump, apparently, according to Dick Durbin, repeatedly used yesterday in the Oval Office or in the White House. They were avoiding the word by saying blank hole and stuff like this. And then the Washington Post put it in a headline on the front page, and then within 15 minutes, at least MSNBC, I didn't check CNN, was actually just saying it on the air. I mean, you know, Joy Reid opening a show last night with that, and before her, Chris Matthews. I just want to say to all of my listeners for today's program, particularly since today is Anything Goes Friday, CNN and MSNBC are not over-the-air stations. They are on cable television. Cable television is only very lightly regulated by the Federal Communications Commission. I'm on over-the-air stations. We're on AM and FM stations all over the United States and in several other countries. And those are regulated by the FCC, and there still are George Carlin's 7, you know, it's probably more than that, but there still are obscenity rules. So I'm not going to use the word on the air. And I ask you, when you call in, please do not use the word on the air. If you do, number one, we will blank it out. Nobody will hear it because there's an obscenity filter that we've got. There's a time delay that we can just dump things. And so, you know, it'll be a wasted effort. And number two, I will X you out of our database and you'll never be able to call the program again, which is what happens when anybody drops an obscenity on the air on this program. So, you know, it's unusual that I have to start a program with a caveat and a request like that. But it's also unusual, to say the very least, that a president of the United States would refer to predominantly black or Hispanic countries with an obscenity that is just, it is so vile. So there's that. The thing that I thought interesting last night as I was watching TV when all this stuff was breaking was that there seemed to be, at least on MSNBC and CNN, I don't get Fox any longer because we've moved to nothing but online television, Sling, and I don't think they carry Fox, or if they do, I haven't found it, and I haven't been particularly looking for it. So I'm not sure how they handled it. But MSNBC and CNN both were operating out of the, for lack of a better word, assumption, or at least their programming and their hosts seemed to be operating out of the assumption that everybody in the country and the world was horrified that Donald Trump would use this word for excrement and the place that it comes from in the human anatomy. Or maybe the utensil into which it is dropped. I don't know. I don't know the etiology of that word. But, you know, so many people were assuming that everybody was going to be horrified. I beg to differ. Remember back when Hillary Clinton talked about the basket of deplorables supporting Donald Trump? Of the I think it's 23% of Americans who are registered as Republicans, and then you've got another probably 20% of independents who are hardcore Trump voters, or Trump lovers, or trumpets, or Trumpistas, or Trumpettes, or whatever they call themselves. I'm of the opinion that the president's comment yesterday is actually going to strengthen his base and increase his popularity with them. Because he just basically came out and said out loud the line that the people and organizations associated with people like Sebastian Gorka and Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon say in code. And frankly, what Ronald Reagan said in code when his first public speech after he was nominated to be president of the United States, and he was campaigning for that in 1980, His first public speech after the RNC convention was at the Nebosha, however you say it, near Philadelphia, Mississippi, the county fair there. Right down the street from where Schwimmer and Cheney and Goodman, the three civil rights activists, were murdered in 1960, what was it, 8, I think, 7, I forget what year. It might have even been earlier than that, but it was, I remember when it happened. It was a big deal in Mississippi. They made a movie about it, Mississippi Burning. And Reagan's speech was all about states' rights. Donald Trump Jr. reprised that. It was 1964. Thank you, Sean. The first speech that, to the best of my knowledge, that Donald Trump Jr. gave, the first major speech, was also at that county fair near Philadelphia, Mississippi. And he was also talking about things like states' rights. These guys have been saying this in code. Richard Nixon did his Southern Strategy. Ronald Reagan did. George Herbert Walker Bush, a little more moderated. He's, you know, a little more of a high-class guy personally. I mean, former director of the CIA. I've got some problems with George Herbert Walker Bush, but nonetheless, and his stupid war in Iraq, which was done for purely electoral reasons to get himself reelected. It didn't work. As his son pointed out, he didn't let it last long enough. His war in Kuwait, actually, technically. But he followed the Iraqi soldiers back and killed them as they fled. But he was a little more moderate. But basically, every Republican since Richard Nixon has run on a campaign of keeping down black people, suppressing the black vote, vilifying black people, trying to characterize all recipients in the United States of welfare as black people. Actually, most recipients of welfare are white people in this country. Of course, white people are numerically larger, but nonetheless. But what Donald Trump said yesterday, in speaking of countries that are majority black or largely black or majority Hispanic, what Donald Trump, you know, it's just a variation of what he said about Mexican rapists. He just said out loud what these guys have been saying in code for 36 years. And I suppose to that extent, to the extent that Donald Trump is finally being honest about who he is and who his supporters are, and who all of his Republican enablers in the House and Senate, if they have not denounced this, who they are, we should thank him for just putting it out in the open. Because we've been doing this absurd two-step since the 80s, really since the early 70s with Richard Nixon's war on drugs and all this kind of stuff. But then Reagan really amped it up with this whole welfare queen thing. These guys have been saying, oh, those black people, they're troublesome, they're inferior, they're not as smart, they're bad, you know, blah, blah, you know, and Trump just comes out and says it in a quite obscene way. Hillary Clinton was right. The people who support this man are deplorables. And I would add, you know, clearly anybody who has not now, as a consequence of what was just said, denounced, turned their back on, and walked away from Donald Trump, has just basically announced to the world that they're a racist.